But we're going to do the Apostle Thomas, okay, today. And the reason why, because I could do an overview of some of it as far as the history goes, but it can be pretty in-depth, okay? And the reason why I say that is because when I say Thomas, you might be reading the Bible, and when you read the Bible, you might... apologize. You might conclude there's not a lot of passages on the Apostle Thomas, and there's not. And you might conclude there's not a lot to teach about, but historically there's a lot. Oh my, there's a lot of content about Thomas. By the way, it's a challenge as we keep going further with the apostles from here, and the reason why, because there's less information biblically about them. So when we started with like Peter, there's a lot of information. John, a lot of information. James, not so much, but still a chunk. Judas, a lot of information, and then all of a sudden it's gonna get the information as far as the content is gonna get less and less and less, which obviously becomes challenging when you teach on it, but it's still fun and it's still interesting. But Thomas, if I were to say Thomas, what comes to mind? What do you think of Thomas?
Doubting Thomas.
All right.
Put his fingers in the holes.
I like the photos I sent you guys. That's the scene that like Thomas is now defined by, right? And same thing if I say Judas. Judas is known for what? Betrayal. Right. So now Thomas is not his real name. It's a nickname. His real name is Judas. Okay, Judas Thomas Didymus. Okay, and the word Thomas essentially is twin, and we get it from the Aramaic. So remember, in the original languages of the Bible, there's Greek, there's Hebrew, there's Aramaic. Aramaic is kind of like a dialect or is similar to Hebrew. But it's Toma in Aramaic, and that's the language that the apostles and Jesus spoke. Okay, but in Greek it's Didymus. Okay, so twin is essentially what it is. Okay, twin. So when we'll read some of the passages, it'll say Thomas the twin. Okay, Thomas the twin. And then you ask yourself, where does twin come from? And twin, we don't know. That's the bottom line as far as why, why twin. But we have some speculations. It could have been given or a descriptive name. It could have been, and so in the ancient Syriac Christians, they viewed, and this is from the later writings. Okay, when it comes to twin, because in John's Gospel it says twin. A lot of people view in the Syriac tradition is that they view Thomas as a spiritual twin of Jesus. Okay, so yeah, twin of Christ. It's pretty powerful. But again, we don't know this biblically, these are our only speculations because we don't know if he was, if he had a biological twin. Is that he mirrors the journey of us, the twin of humanity, from doubt to faith. Okay. So that's where we get but again, Thomas is what it means is twin. Okay, so he is most likely from Galilee. Again, remember I sent you guys a map of the Sea of Galilee of Capernaum. That's where most of the disciples were from, except for Judas. Okay, so now his calling. Okay, we don't know exactly because we're not told in the Bible his calling. But again, it's fascinating later on what happens. So again, we don't know much about his calling or whatnot, but we do hear about certain passages about Thomas. Okay, now let's all turn to John 11. John chapter 11. And if I could have someone read from verse John 11... 1 to 16. 1 to 16. It's a very famous passage. We all know this passage. John chapter 11, verses 1 to 16. If someone can read that out loud.
John 11. 16? 1 through 16.
Yeah, 1 through 16.
Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back there?" Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he will be seen by the world's light. It is the way he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After that, he said this. We went on to tell him, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. So let's go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of his disciples, "Let's also go, that we may die with him."
All right. So
Is it 17 or 16?
No, 16. It's perfect. So
Right there.
yeah, so Thomas, called Didymus, or the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Okay, so again, when you hear about that passage, it's the famous Martha, or it's the famous Mary, Lazarus passage where Christ, hears about Lazarus, his friend that died, and he's like, "I'm going to wake him up," but he waited a couple days. He waited 2 days. Now, it's not that I want to emphasize. It's the part where it's the part where it says that they wanted to kill him. Right? What verse is that? It's the part where they said they wanted to kill him. Where he says in verse 7, the disciple says, "Rabbi," and the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, right? And are you going there again? Right, in verse 8 and 9. So essentially, after hearing that, like, okay, people want to kill Jesus, what's the initial response of a person? Is safety. Right. All right. We need to be wise. Maybe we should bring swords. Maybe we should bring guards, or maybe we shouldn't go. Right. That's like the common response a person would have. But you have Thomas, okay, that all of a sudden says so. That says, "Let us go. Let us also go, that we may die with him." So instead of like bringing swords or clubs or being defensive, he's like, "Yeah, well, okay, fine. We'll die with you." Okay. Now, John's gospel is John. You know. So whenever John writes, sometimes he'll go to a human incentive. He'll go to the motive of the person. So I think it's the chapter after this where Judas, where it says, like, where Mary poured the perfume on his feet He's like, oh, we got to sell it. We could have given this to the poor. It's $30,000. It was $30,000 in conversion to today. But John brings up his motivation and says he was just saying that, he wanted to appear good, but he really cared about the money. Right? So again, there's always that, I know what this person's, or Jesus, in John chapter 2, where he says, like, destroy this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days. And then the Jewish leader is like, 3 days? It's taken us 45 years to build this thing. What are you talking about, right? And then John says he was taught his motivation. So that being said, hearing Thomas say this, I think there's an honesty here. I think I'm concluding that Thomas is being very authentic as far as his motivation goes, and his motivation is true. And I don't know if we have time this week or today, but he died that way. Okay, so what he's saying is true, right? Let us also go that we may die with him, and his life shows that. Okay, so this is very powerful. In the midst of you could be pessimistic, you could have gave in to things, but no, he was really. It shows the heart of Thomas that not a lot of us see. Okay, John 14, 5 and 6. Can someone read? John 14, 5 and 6. John chapter 14. And then can someone read 5 and 6? One of the most famous passages in John's gospel.
Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How do we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me.
All right. So this is arguably one of the most famous lines of Christ, right? Would you guys agree? Like John, it's all John's gospel, John 3:16, John 14:6. But like when you hear about Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through me. It's a very famous line of Christ. And the context, the reason why Jesus brought that up is because there's a question by Thomas, right? And not a lot of us see that, right? Lord, we do not know where you're going. How do we know the way? And this is in the context of Jesus speaking about mansions and I'm going to leave you and all that. And again, the curiosity of the Apostle Thomas here. Okay, so it's kind of like an alley-oop. He sets Jesus up for this line of like, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Famous passage. Okay, now Thomas did what is clear. Okay, these are certain passages not a lot of us see, but we don't really notice that. Hey, Thomas said this. Oh, Thomas said that. Right? But Thomas did not want to live without Christ, Jesus. He did not want to live without him. Okay. Thomas, as we stated already, is that Thomas is typically known for his doubt. Okay. But his love and his loyalty for Jesus was very profound. Very profound. Okay. Notable moments, and this is just human nature. This is us. The good or the bad. Whenever there's climactic moments, the good or the bad, we're always known for that. We have a tendency to define ourselves by that. We define ourselves. We define other people. Other people define us by that, right? Good or bad moments. Okay, notable moments. For instance, if I say Abraham, he's known for what? The father of faith, right? He's known for being a man of faith, but because we define him by Genesis 22, which is where he wanted to sacrifice. God called him to sacrifice his son Isaac. And he did. And what does that expose? It exposes his heart. And his heart is that he had faith in God. And Hebrews 11 confirms that he would even resurrect him from the dead, even though there's no Jewish concept of resurrection at the time. Okay, so again, it's like we see Abraham as a man of great faith, but we don't see the journey that it took for him to get there. right? We just skip over that. There was a journey, there was a life that Abraham lived that, again, it took for him to get to that point. And he was past 100 years old at this point, right? We don't see that. He gave birth to Isaac. His wife gave birth to Isaac when he was 100 years old. Okay, so he had to be 130 something around this time. Okay, but again, there was a point where he was 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and he journeyed through life. And I'm sure there's many times where he doubted, right? And this is twice he lied to Abimelech about his wife, right? That's my sister. It's my sister. Okay, but again, we do that. The reason why we view Abraham that way, because we define a person by their climactic moments, the good or the bad, or didn't have a lot of bad, but again, like he had the good, and that's what we define him by. Or if I say David, what are some moments that define David? David and Goliath, something good that defines David, right? Right. If most people, if I say King David, you're gonna go with David and Goliath, right? The good. Another thing that defines David is the bad. Something that defines David is adultery. Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 15. Okay, so again, these moments typically define a person. We filter that, or none of us ever think of. At 2 Samuel 15, none of us ever think of 2 Samuel 24. 2 Samuel 24 is where David was counting his soldiers, right? And it doesn't say why he did it, but again, the response of God can really expose his heart, being like, I think he was self-dependent. I think he was dependent on his own army. They had like 1.3 million soldiers. That's like the size of the U.S. It's bigger than the U.S. military today. Right, so Israel, the little nation of Israel, had a huge army, and I think he was very dependent upon that. And as a result, God sent the plague that wiped out 70,000 Jews. So again, that's a lot of people dead because of David's counting his sentence. But no one even thinks about this, right? How many of you guys? It's your first time ever hearing that? Be honest.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my point, right? Not a lot of us know about this, about David, but it's horrible what happened. But again, it's these climactic moments, the good or the bad, that really defines a person, really. And here in Thomas is that when we think of Thomas, we just think of him as John chapter 20, is where he doubted Jesus, right? And again, we'll get into the nature of the doubt in a bit. But again, no one really sees his passion, his devotion for Christ, right? The John 11 passage. Let us go that we may die with him. Okay, this shows courage, a willingness to follow Jesus, even to the point of death. Okay, or the Last Supper. Lord, we do not where you're going, so how can we know the way? We want to be with you, Jesus, essentially. Okay, so he at the moment, like all of us, if we're in this John 14 passage, it's called the Olivet Discourse, John 14 to John 17, is that if he failed to understand the bigger picture, but that's his mind, but it's okay, because his deep desires remain with Christ. His heart was right. His heart was right the whole time. Okay, so remember this is that. Measure life by your nearness to Jesus. Okay, measure your life by your nearness to Christ, your heart's desire for Christ. I think that is a good standard to define your life. I know we can get so hard on ourselves and define our significance by many means, money or children or family or where you're at. But I think we need to go back to the basics of this, and we can learn this from Thomas, and that is that how much do you desire nearness to Christ? And I think that is the true worth, the true measure of a human being, and it's that right there. Is my first desire to stay close? Is my first desire to stay close to Christ? Is that central? Okay, whatever the cost. Okay. So remember, a faithful life is defined by the not by the absence of doubt, but by the refusal to live apart from Jesus. Okay. Any questions at this moment?
No.
No? No?
No.
But again, to me, this is very powerful. What I mean by that is, like, when we define Thomas, we don't see this part. We just define him by chapter 20, right? And if you know history, it's unbelievable. Just some of the, just Thomas's life, and this part would make more sense. It magnifies this part right here. Okay, so these are the only passages, actually. John 11:16, John 14:5, that we know of as far as Thomas during the ministry of Jesus. Okay, during the ministry of Jesus. Now, Jesus died, and he was buried, and he resurrected. Okay, he resurrected. Now, when he resurrected, we're now going to go to the famous part, the very famous passage here. Let's all go to John chapter 20. John chapter 20. John chapter 20. And can someone read verses 24 to 25? Just two verses.
Mm-hmm. Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But then he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hands in his side, I will not believe it."
All right. So stay right there. Okay. Now, we know what happens next. Okay. So Bonnie, if you want to continue reading, I want to stop there because there's a gap. Okay. But let's if you want to read 26 to 29, you can finish that there.
A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." But Thomas said to them, "My Lord and my God." Jesus then told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed."
All right. So the reason why we pause there, so look at verse 24, 25. So this is, remember, post Jesus' resurrection. So Jesus is alive. Jesus resurrected. Now, as he resurrected, Thomas is not with the disciples. Thomas is not with them. He's alone. Okay? And he says in the very famous, so the other disciples told him, verse 25, "We have seen the Lord," but he said to them, "Unless I see in my hands the mark of the nails, place my finger into the mark of the nails, place my hands into his side, I will not believe." Okay, and it stops there. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, he was by himself at this time. Okay, now something that we don't really pick up, and as we read this passage, is that Thomas was in a state of grief like everyone else. So he did not see the resurrected Christ. When someone dies, when your friend dies, if a family member dies, and it's been 3 days, and it's not just been 3 days, but they were like executed, embarrassed, what would your emotional state be like? What would your
grieving him.
What's that?
He's sick.
They're still grieving him.
You be in a state of grief. Okay, so remember,
They could be a little bit angry that Thomas acted that way too,
he could.
saying he wouldn't believe it. He
could-
needed proof.
Yeah, it's the fact that he was alone, is what I'm trying to stress out. Is that in this state, 3 days later, he's by himself. All the apostles are there. They're together now. He is in a state of grief. He's been crushed, and remember, this is a man that, remember, I'm putting those two passages, connecting that, is that this is a man that desired to be with Christ, right? It says, I'll die with him. I'll die with him, right? And now he's crushed, okay? Now, an observation we can pick from this passage is some people grieve in solitude. Okay, some people grieve in solitude. After Jesus was arrested and crucified, Thomas was not with the other disciples when Christ first appeared, and his absence may indicate a need to process grief privately. Okay, it's an indication to how grief can be processed privately. Some people feel emotions so deep that communal mourning is insufficient for them. Okay, it's insufficient for them. So John MacArthur says, what set Thomas apart from the other 10 was not his doubt was greater, but that his sorrow was greater. Okay, he was grieving differently. So his level of sorrow was so great. He had deep. He became very sorrowful at this moment. So, again, something that we could take away is that respect different ways of grief and growth within people. Okay, people grieve differently. I know if you've ever experienced grief or loss, you might process it a certain way psychologically. You might respond physically in a certain way. But what you don't want to do is assume your journey of grief and how you respond is how everyone else should respond. And when you see someone responding in a certain way, you become very judgmental. And you say, you're supposed to be like this because I was like this. You know, I brought this up to a person that lost their husband, and, you know, just talking about the nature of grief and just saying, like, I saw this video of a guy on Facebook wailing for his dog. And his dog wasn't even dead. They just had to put the dog down. And it was an older gentleman, and he was just sobbing. Like his dog was still alive, but, you know, just partially, like, they were going to put it down. And he was just sobbing. And me, as you know, like dogs and cats, I'm just like, you know, let's get a new one, you know. You know, your cat's dying, just get a new one. It looks just like it. You dye the hair, whatever, you know, just the same thing. That's me. But what do I know? Right? What do I know about this journey of cats and dogs and how this gentleman was? So, you know, me losing my dad, it made me more sympathetic to someone like that. I'd be like, you know what, I don't know what's going through his mind. I don't know what's going through his heart. But you learn to sympathize as far as like the pain of loss that someone's going through, and how they deal with it, right? So there's the pain of loss, but again, there's how someone processes things right after that, right? So some people, they need to be with, they're very needy, they just need to be physically with people, right? Other people, they want to be alone. They want to be alone. And again, there's different ways how you deal with it. When Princess Diana died, it was Prince William and Harry. They were like 12 and 15 at the time, very young. And the queen, what she did was that her tactic was to make Prince Harry and William as busy as possible. Activities, school, military, as busy as possible, and it was for them to really cope with their grief. But what really happened was that they never dealt with it, both of them. And they both later on came out in their 30s, and they were saying like it didn't really, their grief came later on, right? So because they were so young, the reality never hit them till later in their 30s. So you have two guys that, again, 12 and 15, they lost their mom, and it was such a public event, how it happened. And the fact that they had to deal with grief later on in life, and it shows. This is just the nature of it and how people process things. But it didn't really work, getting kids active. But I always encourage, like, you want to cry that out, be as honest as possible, because when you're busy, you're not honest with yourself about it. You just lost your mom publicly, right? So again, people deal with it different. Whenever someone is talking, and then all of a sudden they need a pause and they start crying or something, it just shows. And it's an event that happened 40 years ago, let's just say, or a loss that happened 40 years ago. What that shows is they're still in processing. They're still processing that moment. The fact that it happened, you cannot deny how the heart responds: crying, laughter, all that stuff. You can say I'm fine, but if you're crying, you're not fine. You're still processing it, right? So again, I say this because, again, when we read this about Thomas, we don't really see why was he alone. Why was he so adamant about about this event right here? All right. So again, respect the different ways of grief and how it hits people. All right. So, any observation about this point? No.
No.
All right.
No, but I can certainly relate. I mean, just knowing how, when my mom passed, and how differently my sister and I reacted.
Yeah.
It's just very different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, it's the same thing with me and my brother, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
In philosophy, it's called qualia. Qualia is your sense perception, and your sense perception is your experiences from childhood all the way till today. There's that famous ratatouille or chef, where it's like it's a video I saw where there was an Asian man, and he was like in the military, and then he tried they gave him his mom's food, and he never saw his mom for years, and he tried it, and his eyes lit up, and it's like he's like he knew that was his mom's food, and his mom was behind him. They hugged, and it was one of those sentimental films, but like that bite right there, it's like you can just see right through his eyes, like when he was 5 years old, eating his mom food, 6, 7, 8, and all of a sudden he adapts to it. And then, adulthood comes and all that separation and military, and you know what I mean? But like, that's his quality, that's his sense perception. And that could be different from his brothers, his sisters, and vice versa for you too. Is that you have experiences that are different from your brothers and sisters, right? And a narrative that you build, and experiences. And again, it's what makes us unique and what makes us who we are, experiences, and how we respond to them. Right, but again, like that's what it's called. It's called qualia. So when grief hits, man, like what's going on to the person, you could just never assume, even if you're family. Right, you can try, but again, that's your own experiences. So again, same thing with Thomas and what's going on, and but again, self-isolation when it comes to grief, it's a thing. So verse 26 to 29. Now, Bonnie, yours says a week later. Mine says 8 days. Okay, 8 days later, and again, so remember, the reason why we stopped there is because there's 8 days between verse 25 and verse 26. 8 days.
Yeah.
Okay, a week later. Okay, a lot of us would just read through that. Now, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. although the doors were locked. Okay, he stresses that twice. The doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and says, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas specifically, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him and says, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Okay, so remember, I stressed the 8 days of separation there, of that. This emphasizes Thomas in his journey of like, I don't know if I can believe this until I see him, until I see this is the Christ that I saw, my friend, right? And then this emphasizes 8 days later, Jesus came to him. Okay, so we're correlating Jesus pursuing him. Okay, so remember, Jesus sympathizes with our weakness. Okay, Thomas's doubt is commonly misunderstood. Remember, it says in verse 25, "Unless I see the nails and marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were, I will not believe." Okay, so this doubt, the reason why I say it's commonly misunderstood, this doubt arose from grief and love. Okay, or love. How about that? Like, grief is what you love, who you love, the thing you love is no longer there; it's gone. So grief implies love. If you don't love the thing or person, there's no grief. You're like, okay, person's gone, right? It's this is a birth. This questioning is out of love. Now, the reason why I say this is it's not mere skepticism or rebellion that Thomas has, and that's typically how we read this passage. Skepticism, right? Rationality. I need an argument, right? It's Thomas could not bear to hold on to hope that might be false, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, this is more emotional. This is pure. This is grief type of questioning here. So Jesus came to him, and he responded in patience. He responded in grace, kind of like Lazarus. He waited. So remember, that's what I'm saying. That's what I've specified. There's 8 days between verse 25 and 26. And it shows the compassion of Jesus sees this. He doesn't see it as a threat. And that's what I'm saying. A lot of us, when we read this, when we read Thomas, we kind of see it as like purely rational. Right? Remember, we are existential beings, all of us. When I say existential beings, is we feel. We feel before we think, and we think because we feel. Okay? And again, this is not a purely like Thomas is like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins and needs some like sophisticated argument to prove that his friend is there. No, this is one out of pure grief and sorrow. And Jesus comes to him 8 days later. And again, John is pinpointing this as far as an act of compassion. He's coming to a man that's broken. Okay, he's coming to a man that's grieving that his friend is gone. Okay, so it's good to acknowledge your doubts and just being honest about the pain. But I think like when we think of doubt, like I think a lot of us think intellectual. A lot of doubt could be emotional. Most people's doubt is emotional. It's not rational. Right? When I say that, I mean like someone is just going through life. Someone's life is just in pain. And guess what? Because they're in emotional pain, then they doubt. Right? It's always in that order. And that's what I'm saying. Christ would come to someone in that state, just like Thomas. Okay? So let sorrow deepen your faith and not destroy it. Christ comes, God comes to you in your sorrow. Okay, just like Thomas. So this is not, I want to stress, this is not a skepticism of rationality. Remember, it's 3 days after his friend was executed publicly. He's in sorrow. He's in grief. And we do that. We're the ones that do that. When we read into the Bible, when we read other people's situations, we don't see the existential part, right? We just assume, he's just thinking, sophistication. He needs an art. No, he's in grief, and we skip that part. You know where Samson, where he's with Delilah, and 3 times. Remember 3 times. It's like, tell me your secret. Tell me your secret. And it's the 3rd time, it's like we want to scream into the scripture, big, Samson, she doesn't have your best interest, my friend. No, Samson, she's a Proverbs 7 woman, right? We assume, but again, he's in the moment. He's in the moment of lust, right? We're reading this in the 21st century, assuming our situation, right, of Samson. But again, we're existential beings. We go through things. We experience things, right? The same thing with Thomas here. We don't see this part about Thomas, is that this is a man in grief, right? And he's questioning based upon that status of grief. And Jesus comes to him, 8 days later, and he comforts him at that moment. Okay? So again, this is just something we don't see. Also, excuse me. Our ultimate hope is in the resurrection and the divinity of Christ. Okay, our ultimate hope is in the resurrection and the divinity of Christ. So the whole point of putting his hands on him is the resurrection is physical. Okay, so the Gnosticism denies that, but again, it's a physical body. And not only that, but notice how he responds. And Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." And that's what I'm saying. Our hope, as far as us in the 21st century, is based upon the resurrection and divinity of Jesus Christ. Thomas, like all the disciples, initially could not grasp the physical resurrection. Even during the earthly ministry, Jesus would say something, and then they would kind of get it, and it was after the resurrection all the dots were pinpointed. Oh, that makes sense now. Yes, he said this. This is why when he talked about death, they couldn't understand it, right? Who's the first one to come out and say, no, don't die? Peter. And what did Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Okay, so now it's post-resurrection. It's like, oh my, the light bulb is over their head. Okay, so Christians are called to place their hope, not in death, not in burial, not in human circumstances, but that our ultimate hope, us, if anything, is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay, and what that shows is a guaranteed hope of our future resurrection. Okay, this body, your body, okay, your loved one's body that put their faith in Jesus Christ, that's the ultimate hope right there. Okay, Romans 6:4 says, "We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life." Okay, Romans 8:11 says, "And if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is alive in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of the Spirit who lives in you." That's the hope right there. Okay, that's the hope right there. A lot of times we make up hopes, we make up promises that we put into God's mouth, and then this is why a lot of people, honestly, there's a lot of fatigue, Christian fatigue, is because a lot of times we assume these hopes. Remember, hope is an expectation of the future that was promised to you. That's something that we don't get. It's a future expectation that was promised to you. Okay? A lot of the things that we hope for in life are good, but they're not necessarily promised to us. No one promised that you would live until 90. No one promised that your loved ones would live till 90. Right? It's not promised. What's promised is that if your loved one puts her faith in Jesus and they die, there is a future physical resurrection. Because Jesus resurrected. That's the future hope right there. Okay? So when we assume, when we put these things in God's mouth and that they don't happen, we're like, God, where were you? Where were you? Right? And it's like, God never said that. We did. Right? God never promised. What's that? Question?
Oh, no, sorry. I was talking to Bonnie.
God never promised us a guaranteed happy marriage and children and house. That's the American dream. Right? It could happen, but it's not promised. It's good. It's an objective good, right? But it's not promised. So if it doesn't happen, you don't blame God. God never promised it. Okay? What he promised is the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay? The physical resurrection. And as a result, because Jesus resurrected, he's the first fruits. 1 Corinthians 15 says, therefore we who put our faith in him will have a future resurrection. So your loved ones who have died, and if they're Christian, they're going to be resurrected and have another life, an eternal life. That's the promise right there. Okay, why? It's because it's the hope is a future expectation to something promised. Okay, and that's a physical resurrection, but it's based upon a person. Okay, trust is based upon the character and ability of a human being or a person, that being God. Okay, remember trust. When I trust someone, I trust someone based upon their character, their history. Right? This is why we have resumes. You read them. If you're a company, you're basing it upon their experience, and you have a trust, right? That's why banks have interest, and you have to establish credit. They need to trust who you are, right? Baseball. We're talking about the Dodgers and the Blue Jays, right? There is a trust based upon the batter, a trust based upon the pitcher. And you know that through experience. So when there's a good batter that comes up and the bases are loaded, right? And all of a sudden there's, right, and the game's on the line, your trust will be dependent upon the person based upon who they are. If they have a bad experience, if they're not a good player, you won't have any trust upon that person. You have no hope for that person, right? You're like, oh, great, this is where we lose, right? But our trust, as far as the resurrection, is based upon God himself, who is a human being. How does Thomas respond? My Lord and my God. The Lord of me, the God of me. In Greek, hakurios mu, kai theos mu. Right? Kurios, Lord, theos, God. And it's the way, it's the God of the Old Testament. Okay? And remember, it's the first acknowledgement of a human, a disciple, an apostle upon Jesus saying, you are God. Okay? You are the God of, you are God. Remember, if Jesus was not God, you know what would have happened? He would have confronted him. He said, hey, I'm not God. Hey, stop there. Right? There's only one God. Right? Well, he didn't. He accepts it. On top of that, verse 29, blessed are those who have not seen and yet haven't believed. He blesses him. Okay? He doesn't rebuke him. He blesses him after being called God. Okay? Remember in the book of Revelation, right? When someone was not God or they were worshipped, they were always rebuked. Right? But here, Jesus is called God and now he blesses him. Okay? That's who he is. So remember, there's a stance of the divinity of Christ that the scriptures really uphold. Right? But remember, the two go hand in hand. The divinity of Jesus Christ, him being God, and ultimately the resurrection of Christ too. Okay, remember, the first 7 ecumenical councils of the church, that's the church after the book of Acts, they stayed together, and they had councils. They met because there's always heresy, and Jesus predicted these things. Right? But they're always, the majority of them, I think 6 out of 7, were about the identity of Christ, who he was. Right? So, again, these are things to consider. Okay, so remember, anchor your hope in the physical resurrection and the divinity of Jesus Christ, who he is. Okay? Any questions? No? All right. Now notice how he says, Blessed are those who have not seen but still believe. Okay? When Thomas declared belief after seeing Jesus, Jesus says, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. John 20, verse 29. Okay? Now remember, this is why a lot of people speculate that Thomas is called the twin, is because it's a picture for us. Remember, this whole thing about seeing and believing, most of people through human, we don't see Jesus. We don't see Jesus, right? But this is a picture of, this is kind of an example for all of us, really, because none of us have really seen. I'm not saying Jesus can't show up, but for the most part, has Jesus ever physically appeared to any of us here in this group? Hands up? No? All right, so we've never seen. Okay, so this applies to us today. And that's what I'm saying. Thomas is a good example as far as how we should live today, right? And this faith is central to the Christian life. Okay, it's central to the Christian life as far as seeing without necessarily, or believing without seeing. Okay, Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance of what we do not see. Okay, the famous passage, 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we live by faith and
Not by sight.
not by sight. We live by faith and not by sight. Okay, believers today are reminded that faith, not sight, sustain hope, and that Christ remains faithful even when human understanding is very limited. Okay, live by faith, not by sight, and this is what Thomas shows us. Okay, this is essentially the Christian faith. Okay, a lot of evidence, a lot of history that we could be assured of, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of the human heart. And do we believe? Do we have faith in the resurrected Lord? Because again, this applies to all of us right here. Okay. Now, one more passage, and I don't think we can go into the history. I think we might have to we have to do this next week. But it's fascinating about Thomas's life. But maybe we could essentially when John 21, where Jesus kind of restores Peter, 3 times. He says, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" Thomas was there. Okay, it says in John 21:2, it says Simon Peter, Thomas, in parentheses, called a twin, Nathanael of Canaan in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and the 2 others of his disciples were together. So 7 of them. Okay, so my point is that during this time of John's gospel, when Jesus is talking to Peter, Thomas is present. He's there during this moment here. Okay, so he's present at the Sea of Galilee. Okay, among the 7. Now, I think we're gonna have to stop here. Okay, and the reason why is because I want to talk to you guys maybe next week, and it's more in detail, and I could have photos, and because not a lot of people know about this, and I can go over it right now, but I think it'd be better maybe in detail if you guys want to do it next week, or do you want to do it now?
Next week.
Yeah. So essentially, Thomas, okay, he's known to be doubting Thomas, okay, but Thomas actually really took that gospel, Matthew 28:19, make disciples out of all nations, right? He really did that. And typically, and I'll stress this next week, okay, is that typically, and you can see this in today, 2,000 years later, you can see this in history, even the stereotypes, right, of what people say, like I'm just going to say some stereotypes is Christianity is the white man's religion. You guys ever hear that? right? And that's because of the direction where Christianity went throughout history. So it went to Europe, it went to Rome. If you look at, Rome, there's 4 churches in the east and there's only 1 church in the west, that's Rome. And from the Roman Catholic Church, or Rome, it really spread throughout Europe, right? And that's kind of what it was, Christendom, for a good portion of 1,500 years. But what we don't know is where the gospel went to Africa, through the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, right? Really early on, right? You still have the Ethiopian church till today that preserved that tradition. But the church also went east, okay? And the church went all the way to India. And who brought the gospel, and the church brought the gospel to India? Thomas.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's unbelievable, like the detail. So there's a book, and we can go over this next week and even read it together. And it's a 3rd century document called the Acts of Thomas, and it shows you exactly what Thomas did after the book of Acts and his missionary journeys, and how he pretty much spread the gospel to all of India. Yeah, and he died there. So I'll end here. There are 3 churches today that it's called a basilica, right? Where a church, a cathedral, will be on top of a dead apostle, a dead body. And you have St. Peter's Basilica, right? We went over Rome and how Peter had to have his bones. We have James in Spain. And we talked about the cathedral, and there's pilgrimages there till today. That the church is built on, basilica is built on top of James's body, right? Not the brother of Jesus. And third is Thomas. Is that Thomas was killed by being speared to death in India, and they built a basilica over him. It's in India today. Yeah, it's amazing. By the way, I can show you this through text if you'd like. But the first church in all the Americas is here in Merida. Yeah. The first church ever built in all the Americas is here in Merida. So the Spanish conquistadors, when Hernan Cortez, and when they conquered, Mexico City, they were here in Merida before, and what they did is that they destroyed an Aztec temple. And, where they used to sacrifice humans, the villagers here. And then they took the bricks of the Aztec temple and they built the first cathedral ever. Yeah, church here. All the North, South America is right here. And, it's fascinating, very fascinating. So, and the biggest cross, I was there. I can show it to you tomorrow if you'd like. But the biggest cross, too, in all the churches, like inside of cathedrals, is in that same church. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. So, yeah. But anyways, Thomas took that gospel all the way to India. But it's not just that; it's the details, because again, it was documented. So maybe next week we can go over that. I can show you pictures, and it's very fascinating. But again, it goes to chapter 11, chapter 14 of his desire to really pursue Christ. Because again, we define him by his doubt. Right, his doubt. But again, that doubt is not, it's due to grief. He didn't want to be let down, right? So again, this is a man that really desired his friend Jesus. Again, that's why they call it, a lot of history calls it the twin, because he was the twin of Jesus as far as how he emulates himself. So anyways, we'll stop there. And